This is Liz Colburn, host of Invited. Thanks for checking out the following podcast on Public House Media.
Everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy, and you probably are too. My name is Lindsay, and I am here with Tegan, as usual, for your bi-weekly Talkin' Nerdy. This week, we decided we wanted to kind of revisit that little bit of time where we were talking about some of our favorite actors, like people who, I guess we've only really done men so far, but this week, we are going to talk about Sir Patrick Stewart. It's funny because I didn't ever realize how many things he really was in before and how monumental he's actually been in like geekdoms and fandoms and things like that. But we're going to talk a little bit about it and hopefully you'll learn something you didn't know before. First, though, Tegan's going to hit it off with Gaming Corner.
Yep, and this week I just wanted to talk a little bit about, like, revisiting classics and, like, just kind of being honest with ourselves about older games. Because, you know, really in any gaming community I've been in, whether it's been Fallout, whether it's been Dragon Age, really, or, like, Elder Scrolls, any, you know, game that has, like, a series or has, like, reboots or remakes or whatever, people always will, you know, favor the older games. You know, I think part of it's nostalgia, part of it is, you know, there are some really good things about the older games, but I think one of the things is people don't always talk about the flaws in the older games. Like, the older games are really held up as this, you know, shining example of the peak, you know, of this particular series, and, you know, other installments are just kind of looked down on, and you know, particular flaws about older games aren't really talked about as much. I think one of the biggest things as I was revisiting Dragon Age Origins earlier this week is that as much as I do love the game, like genuinely love the game, I love the story, the characters, you know, everything like that, the combat is atrocious. Like, so bad. It's insane. Like, if I did not love this series as much as I did, if I maybe started out with Origins, I probably wouldn't have played the rest of the series because it is just that bad. I mean, as rushed as Dragon Age 2 was with its 14-month development time, they really did take the time to revamp the combat system, and I'm so glad that they did because it's so bad in Origins. I think it would have done so much better if they did like a turn-based RPG like Lord of the Rings: The Third Age or Final Fantasy. Because, it's bad. Like, it's not enough to make me drop it, because I do love that series, but, it's almost like you're fighting the combat system as much as you're fighting the enemies at certain points. And I think it's important to really, like, take a step back and look at the older games, like maybe Morrowind, which I know is always held up as the standard of Elder Scrolls games, or maybe, like, some of the older Fallout games. And, you know, really be honest with, you know what? There are some really great things about these games, but there are also some flaws in it as well. And despite those flaws, we still love it. And that's great. But they do still exist no matter how much we love it. I think it kind of goes back to, I was talking some time ago about how I think we often have this mindset of things that we like have to be good, like objectively good, you know, and how some people like to just deny any flaws in that because, no, I like it, therefore it is good, right? Not necessarily. That doesn't have to be the case, you know. You can like something that's not as good or that has flaws, you know. I think it's just all about being honest. And, you know, obviously these older games still offer something to audiences today, but if I was talking to a gamer who maybe has never played Dragon Age, I would, and they, you know, also maybe don't have as much experience with older RPGs, I would be like, you know what, maybe start with Inquisition first. Because if I had started with Origins, I definitely would not have gone on to play 2 in Inquisition. But starting with Inquisition and developing a love for the series, I could go back and play Origins and see it for what it is and enjoy it still. So I think it's just all about perspective and not letting nostalgia just completely take over and blind us to reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So one of these days, I'm going to have you talk to me about computer games, I think. Because, well, you know, what's funny is right now I am still recording on my dinosaur laptop because it does all the things I need it to do for recording Beauties and Headcanons. So I was like, oh, I will get this new laptop and I just won't transition yet. It still runs on Windows almost 7. It's ancient. And I've talked about that several times in the show too, just about how absolutely old my laptop is. But I got a new one for work and it's kind of spiffy. Like it's got the SSD and it's pretty and thin and sleek, and I specifically got it so that I couldn't play any games on it, I think. I think I made it so that it doesn't have enough memory or RAM or something. But maybe we should talk about that sometime, because sometimes I do want to play games. I actually had a friend who the Final Fantasy revisiting was done very recently. And it's kind of like a nod to a certain part of the game. It's not the entire game. It's just like what's done in a certain part of the world for Final Fantasy. And so he was explaining to me, and I was like, oh, you know, just to see those graphics redone would have been pretty cool. Because I remember thinking they were awesome when I was, you know, too young to know better, and all of us were too young to know better. So, but it'd be cool to kind of see it like reimagined the way things are made now. And I was like, you know, this sounds actually kind of interesting. I always made jokes that I wanted to dress Aurelia up as a chocobo. So, I mean, I could see it. Yeah. Okay, so let's revisit that a little bit later. Let's talk about Patrick Stewart.
Yes. Now, when we talked about, like, Keanu Reeves, I think we kind of had, like, an age litmus test for, like, where you recognize Keanu Reeves from, kind of, like, normally puts you in, like, a certain age group.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like the first thing that you remember him being in is usually, like, indicative of your age. Usually. Not always, but...
Do we feel that way with Patrick Stewart, though?
I feel potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Or at least it gives a really good indication as to, like, what someone's fandoms might be, or, like, what they lean towards, you know?
Yeah, you know, like, I was always kind of an English nerd. My daughter's father always used to be like, oh, okay, Miss English. So I kind of, like, can feel the whole Shakespearean theater thing. I was a big theater nerd as well. Oh, yeah. So, recently, Tegan, you actually told me this, that we had, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, and Sir Patrick Stewart was actually on his social media page reciting sonnets every day. So it's literally just him sitting on a couch or a chair or wherever he happens to be, reading a sonnet from a book. So it's not necessarily by memory. And it's not necessarily something he's ever seen before. So he actually, like, comments on it when he's reading it. He's like, he finishes it and he's like, oh, that was kind of difficult.
Yeah. Like, there was one I watched where he, like, kept restarting because, like, he felt that the rhythm was off. And so, like, he wanted to restart, like, and be on rhythm.
It was really beautiful to, like, have someone who reads so well, you know? Yeah. Be able to have that being read to you, especially in a time where we're, like, inundated with this ridiculousness that's going on around us. Just to be able to sit and breathe for 2 minutes while Patrick Stewart reads to you is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm downplaying it. It's actually really awesome, but I'm a nerd, so it is what it is. Yeah. He actually has been active since he was like 19 years old, and he's 79 years old right now. So he actually, like, tells a story of coming to the United States in a theater company, and they were doing a run of Shakespeare, and that's like how he started. it's so like classically awesome. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I've made the mention before that you can really tell when an actor is like just like a, I don't want to say traditional, but when they've just been doing like Western style things or Hollywood kind of things where they're doing like TV shows or movies or stuff like that. And you can look at them and tell their style and tell how different it is from somebody who has been in theater and has been like a little bit more classically trained. And, you know, they just have this kind of presence and this type of projection that you don't really see a whole lot of outside of the theater.
Yeah, no, and there's a very regalness to his presence whenever I've seen him do an interview as well. Mm-hmm. So, I'll admit, like, Patrick Stewart's one of those people who, you know who he is if you've got half a brain, and you know he's been in all the things that you've been interested in, but...
And probably a lot more.
Probably a lot more. And it was funny, I recently watched a video of him on like a YouTube responding to Google questions. There's a specific name for it, but
Ask Me Anything?
I think so. There's like a board that he's holding that's supposed to symbolize like what people Google the most about him. When you type in Patrick Stewart, you know, all the things that show up. Yeah. And there's really stupid ones like, is Patrick Stewart related to Kirsten Stewart or whatever?
It's 5:45.
And he was laughing. He's like, well, I mean, I've seen her work and she's good and I admire her, but no, we're not related. And there's some other famous Stewart too that was on the question. He's like, no, still not related.
I also wanted to talk a little bit, like not like a shameless plug, but we know Patrick Stewart from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Some better than others. The Next Generation specifically, and there was quite a few movies. And I gotta be honest, I didn't really get into any of the movies, but I feel like The Next Generation was kind of like the soundtrack to my childhood. My dad was a big Trekkie. Mm-hmm. So I have this like idea in my head of not liking Star Trek very much because it was my dad's television show, not mine.
Yeah. And so it was always like inundating you. And, you know, when you're inundated with something, you know, you tend to get to a point where it's like, oh, I just don't even want to get involved with it, you know?
Sure. But, you know, when we see Jean-Luc Picard, he's very iconic. Mm-hmm. Patrick Stewart just doesn't look like he's aged much.
He really doesn't.
One of the things that he had been talking about with the Google searches was like, is Patrick Stewart a vegan? And he's like, no, I'm not a vegan. I do enjoy food, and I enjoy good food. And that's about it. But then he also talks, you know, like people, how does Patrick Stewart stay in shape? And he really just says like, he doesn't like give away any like major fitness secrets or anything. It was so, I don't know, like you expected him to be like a yogi or something. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I mean, you wanted something, but I wanted
something. Yeah.
Realistically, he probably just hit the genetic lottery, you know? Like
he might have, but you know, he actually talks about it having not had a very good childhood. Mm-hmm. He briefly says, like, I decided to, you know, rise above that. And it's almost interesting to me because he is such a cool cat, but at the same time, very humble. And I feel like there are actors out there who know that they're grand, and
the kind
Patrick
of play
Stewart sort of is just like super humble about it. He made jokes about awards that he has not gotten and awards that he has received, and the ones that he have received are very, very much theater awards. Yeah. Very much British theater awards. So just like really cool to have seen, you know, to just kind of like delve into what he's done on IMDb and to see all of like Macbeth and Hamlet and Cleopatra and Antony, and then in 1981 he did Excalibur, and he's not even like a main character in Excalibur. He's Guinevere's dad. Back to Jean-Luc Picard. Picard is streaming right now on the CBS streaming platform. I can't afford another streaming platform, so I don't know how many people really can. And I'd love to know what you guys have to say about Picard specifically, because I've been reading a lot of reviews having to do with where the, obviously tons of people have said, oh, why don't you revisit the Starfleet? And I'm sure Patrick Stewart was like, no, he hasn't been in that role since 2003, 2004 or something. Why would he want to revisit it? But then he goes ahead and he does this, and there's just some really weird little tricky things. Like his number one in the show is a pit bull dog. And he actually chose that. He said that he wanted a pit bull as number one. And he doesn't have his own dogs. I thought I had seen a bunch of videos where he was playing with dogs, but apparently he is just very much an advocate for fostering and fostering from shelters. And the one he specifically does is a high kill, the company that does the fostering, they go to high kill shelters, and he himself actually wants a pit bull, but where he lives, they can't do that because of
laws.
Right, because of the reputation of dog breeds, which, you don't really hear anyone advocating for that very strongly. So it's kind of cool to hear him talk about that and to say, these particular dogs, they just want to make their owners happy, and if their owners are happy because they're defending them or fighting, then that's what they do. And my oh my, is that scary, because I've only ever owned or known the biggest fluffball dogs in the world, but and a couple of them have been pits, so I mean, but they're very ultra protective and so cool. But it was really cool to hear him talk about it like that, and to say, this is what I would want, and this was my choice to have a dog and to be Picard in this part of his life with a dog.
Yeah.
And they were making jokes about how a guy by himself is just a guy by himself, but a guy with a dog is, I don't know, cooler or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to really watch it because, again, I don't really need another streaming service.
Right. Well, I want to know how it is.
Yeah.
It's funny because oftentimes you get into the point where you have a show that is whether it's what you're real interested in, it's your fandom, and you watch the whole television show front to back, cover to cover, or you read it or whatever, and you're an expert at it. And then we've had this conversation a million times, whether or not you're someone who is a purist and believes that the subject matter has to be, respected, or the source material has to be referenced, how canon things are, all of that stuff. So it's interesting to me for it to be this long and for there to be such a diverse group of people who are Trekkies.
Yeah.
And then those who would want to watch it just for the entertainment value of it. I feel like there's probably quite a divisive group there.
Yeah. And I mean, even the character of Picard, has gone through so much, just from the series and the movies and now the new TV series. I mean, he's gone through so many different iterations. I remember watching, especially if you watch some of the earlier seasons of the show, The Next Generation, you can see where Picard is kind of portrayed more as more curmudgeonly and kind of strict and, kind of like that, old dad or grandpa that's just like kind of hard on the kids and everything like that. But, he opens up and he kind of blossoms, and you can see that he really does care. And it's just kind of like the way he cares and how he expresses that, that he kind of comes off as more gruff than he kind of really is inside, and it's just kind of cool to see that evolution of him and kind of see Picard himself come more and more out of his shell and see Patrick Stewart portray that. And, he can be this kind of lovable goofball, and yet he can be just really super strict and serious. It's not just one or the other, it's just what the situation calls for. And he does so, just effortlessly.
Well, and we could talk about the, what makes a good leader as well. Like, you have to have the ability to have some kind of compassion for them. Otherwise, it's not someone you want to go to bat for. It's not someone you really feel for. And I feel like I remember a lot of that being portrayed. I never really felt like, oh, I really love Picard, but it was always like, You
still respected him.
Yeah, I respected him, but also was more interested in the storyline of the developments of who he was involved with. I adored Riker. I don't know why. I thought Riker was the coolest. I didn't really like Data, but I wanted to. I don't know. But so many of those actors were part of the same thing. I couldn't tell you their names right now, but even the guy who played Geordi, he's like my hero. I think right now he's actually also doing social media things where he's reading books for kids.
Yep, LeVar Burton is kind of taking up his Reading Rainbow role again and is reading all kinds of stuff. I know he had tweeted initially when lockdowns were starting to happen, he had tweeted out that he was trying to find or source stories that wouldn't have copyrights on them so that he could read them and obviously they wouldn't get taken down or he wouldn't get in trouble for them. And I know Neil Gaiman specifically gave him blanket, authorization to read any of his stories, and he wouldn't do anything about it. So, I mean, that was really awesome. And it's really cool to see how, certain actors and actresses are handling lockdown and how others aren't as much.
Well, it's really something we should be admiring in that sense though too. There's recently been an influx of protests and people who don't understand what's going on, don't really know. Obviously, none of us really have a clear-cut idea of what's happening, but you can either respond well or respond poorly. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of poor responses lately.
Yeah.
The two states that are most important to me, obviously Wisconsin and Illinois, because all of my family lives in Illinois and I live in Wisconsin. We have just now officially extended the stay-at-home orders. So my daughter is not going back to school. She is going to be doing distance learning. My sister and my brother and their kids, they're not going back to school. And there's a lot of uncertainty as far as how things are going to happen with unemployment and how we keep ourselves safe. And obviously seeing the problems with our healthcare system and the problems with our government system. And hopefully there's going to be some good that comes out of this. But also, going to the stores, I wear a cloth mask everywhere I go. And this past week, haven't seen quite as many cloth masks, and it kind of worries me.
Yeah.
It kind of really scares me because I'm not sick. I'm protecting anyone else around me from what I could possibly be carrying, although I'm asymptomatic, but also, protecting myself from other people. And that's what we're supposed to be doing right now. That's what the CDC said. So I'm scared for everyone who's not doing that. And then simultaneously, I don't know what to do with those feelings. Am I angry?
Yeah.
Am I tired? Am I upset? I don't even know how to deal with those feelings. So I can't imagine when when it's not being handled well, what that's like to not have an outlet or, someone to look up to, someone like, these men who are getting on their social media profiles and reading to us and even, giving us that escape for however long it takes to do these readings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really speaks to the goodwill of their nature and just how they are. One of the quotes from The Next Generation that has really always kind of stuck with me and has been like a comfort to me is when Picard said, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness. That is life." And, it gives a certain amount of comfort to be able to revisit that kind of thing, whether it's, watching him read sonnets on social media, or maybe going back and rewatching some of the older series, or going back into a video game that I've played and love. There's a certain comfort level, I think, that comes from that. And, I'm not sure that everybody is capable of channeling their energy into that, I guess. But, I love the celebrities like Patrick Stewart who go out there and they offer it regardless and, free of charge. And this is, I know that I maybe can't help in researching this or, going out to ERs and, performing doctor's duties, but I'm going to do what I'm able to do to comfort those who need it.
Right, exactly. Geez, I feel like that might have been a cool little tangent for my Geek on Fleek this week.
Whoops.
I mean, there's just so much that I'm like the queen of the tangents, but I did want to briefly ask you if there is any suggestions you do have for like PC gaming.
PC gaming, I mean, it kind of depends on what all you want to do, especially like if your laptop maybe or computer isn't set up for like full on gaming. There's still stuff you can do. Like I have a Mac and it's obviously not going to be compatible with a whole lot. And also it's, obviously not optimized for gaming either, but I have, I think it's called Boxer on here, which allows me to emulate a lot of older games. So I actually have the original Doom on my computer that I can run on this emulator. I actually have, and I also have some older, really older games. I have one in particular that's a DOS-based game that I used to play when I was really, really young. And I know when I say DOS, I know probably at least half the audience isn't even going to know what that is, but just trust me, it's very old. And, I can play that with this emulator on my computer, and there's some websites where you can either download really old games like that either for free or for really, really cheap and just run it on emulators. It's a really great way to play especially older games and not have to really stress out your hardware like that.
Right. Well, and I remember playing on a Nintendo emulator system, so you're at least talking my language. I did want to make sure that we do mention Patrick Stewart's contribution to X-Men.
Yes,
we definitely cannot skirt over Dr. Xavier, so let's talk about that real briefly.
Yeah. I know when he was initially offered the role and told about Charles Xavier, I think somebody showed him some comic art of Professor Xavier, and he was like, "Oh, that's me."
Yes.
And that's kind of part of how he accepted the role was oh, well, obviously they already seem to be using an image that, the image is so spot on that, how can I say no? And I think that's how, because Next Generation, that came out in initially came out in 87, so that was the year I was born. And the movies kind of persisted into the 90s and kind of early 2000s, early mid 2000s. But I think, his presence, at least in the geek world, was really refreshed when he took on the role of Professor Xavier, because it kind of exposed him to a whole new subset of people, whereas, you know, Star Trek is usually more firmly in like the more sci-fi genre of geekdom. You know, X-Men caters to more of the comic nerds, and so it's kind of like a whole new audience that is exposed to him who maybe didn't get a chance to see a bunch of his work previously.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And it's just like really cool to think back on how iconic those roles are as well. Mm-hmm. He's never, other than when that young man played Charles Xavier, who was, you know, also a great actor.
James McAvoy?
Yes. I'm sorry. His name escaped me. But he has always played the older version of Picard. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Charles Xavier, and also as Picard. So he's just, you know, that presence and those characters I'm always going to imagine them as him. Mm-hmm. Even some of the Shakespearean characters he's portrayed were so eloquently done by him that it's hard to really picture anyone else. So, yeah. Was there anything else we wanted to make sure we mentioned?
I mean, I just think it's so neat to have the dichotomy of like two different, very truly iconic characters in one actor. And I mean, yeah. I feel like especially in today's world, the words like iconic are just kind of thrown around, even if they aren't really necessarily appropriate. Like, they're almost overused. But I think in this specific instance, I mean, that is a very appropriate use of the word iconic, because, yes, you know, when you just mention, you know, someone like Picard or like, you know, Charles Xavier, you know, I think a lot of people will immediately think of Patrick Stewart. You know, even before potentially they think of comics or books or anything like that, that's who they'll think of. They'll, you know, if they read something from that character, they'll hear that voice in their head. And to me, that's like when you've really achieved that peak quality of a portrayal of a character. Mm-hmm. The same kind of thing happened to me with Mark Hamill in The Joker, whereas, you know, I read a comic and I hear Mark Hamill's voice as the Joker. You know, I hear, you know, no matter what medium it's in, like, that's who I compare that portrayal of to anything else. Sure. You know, above all. So, I mean, James McAvoy, great actor, but he's not going to be who I think of when I think of Charles Xavier, you know? Sorry, James, you're great, but just not who I think of. Right. You know, he's just gone and made it him, so much so that it's really hard to divorce that character from that actor.
Well, and I also wanted to mention, too, Sir Ian McKellen. The mm-hmm. two of them are both knighted in the British Order, and that is an interesting thing to talk about as well, just because it's the contributions to literature and entertainment that they've mm-hmm.
Made that got them the knighthoods.
However, I thought it was really interesting that Patrick Stewart does credit meeting Ian McKellen to X-Men. Mm-hmm. They were both cast for their roles and then became good friends, learned how much they had in common, and began to just really form this bond. Mm-hmm. And the two of them are the best of friends now. Patrick Stewart talks about how he loves Ian McKellen and Ian McKellen loves him, but his wife also loves Ian McKellen. And he actually married Patrick Stewart and his wife Sunny mm-hmm. In 2003, I think. So it's just like a really cute little bond. Like, it's just beautiful.
It is.
And we know Ian McKellen from obviously X-Men as Magneto and a couple other things as well.
I think we're going to have to cover him too.
Think about all the times that I know. I was about to say, like, we could do voice actors. We could do Mark Hamill and what he's done, because his voice has been in so many different things. Oh my goodness, we could just run with it.
Yeah. Ian McKellen specifically, like, I think I remember him from something I think no one else will remember him from.
Not Lord of the Rings, right?
Nope. I remember him from the TV movie of The Scarlet Pimpernel with Jane Seymour.
Yeah. Yep. You win.
That's where I remember him from. So that will be an interesting little discussion whenever we revisit our little kind of biography, like not really biography, but like discussions about contributions of certain actors and actresses on the geek world in general.
All right.
Is that all then?
That's all.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so very much for sitting down with us and listening to us ramble and rave about Sir Patrick Stewart and his wonderful acting and everything connected with that. If you haven't already, please follow us on social medias at beauties_canons on Instagram and Twitter, and at Beauties and Headcanons on Tumblr. On Facebook, we're under Beauties and Headcanons by Public House Media, and we put out posts usually about every other day. So we do have a bit of a posting schedule. Sometimes it's a little flexible, but I try to stick to a pretty strict schedule of posting on these days about certain things. So go ahead and follow us, give us a like, subscribe, and let us know how you like these episodes, and which actor or actress should we cover next, because I know we've mentioned like a couple of people during this particular episode that we could cover next. So who would you guys like to hear us talk about? Let us know. And with that, I'm Tegan.
And I'm Lindsay, and thanks for getting nerdy with us today on Beauties and Headcanons.